The people who change your life rarely arrive looking important. Rain hammered the restaurant windows hard enough to blur the parking lot into a sea of silver lights. Inside, the dinner crowd had thinned. A few late customers lingered over coffee. Soft music drifted through the speakers. Emily Parker wiped down the last empty table near the entrance and glanced at the clock. 10:43. Her shift would end in less than 20 minutes. Normally, she loved this part of the night. The quiet, the routine, the feeling that another long day was finally ending. But tonight felt different. The storm had grown worse every hour. Wind pushed sheets of rain across the pavement. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city skyline. Emily picked up a stack of menus and carried them toward the hostess stand. That was when she noticed him. At first, he looked like a shadow sitting alone on a bench across the street. Then lightning briefly illuminated the scene. A man, tall, well-dressed, completely soaked. He sat motionless beneath the rain as if he no longer cared that he was getting wet. Emily frowned. Most people would have gone home hours ago. Something about the sight bothered her. Through the glass, she watched him for another moment. Then her attention shifted. Parked near the curb sat a black luxury SUV. The engine was off. The headlights were dark. Through the rain-streaked window, she could barely make out a small figure asleep in the back seat. A child. Emily's stomach tightened. She looked back toward the man. He had not moved. Not once. "You okay?" asked Megan Ross, the restaurant manager. Emily nodded toward the window. "That man outside." Megan glanced over. "Probably had too much to drink. There is a little girl in that SUV." Megan looked again. "Not your problem, Emily." Maybe it was not. Yet she could not stop looking. Something about the scene felt wrong. Lonely. The kind of loneliness that sat heavier than rain. 5 minutes later, Emily found herself standing beside the employee coffee station. She poured a fresh cup into a large paper container. Then she grabbed the only dry umbrella left in the staff closet. Megan noticed immediately. "What are you doing?" Emily smiled softly. "Going outside. In this weather? Someone should check on them." Before Megan could answer, Emily pushed through the front door. Cold rain greeted her instantly. Wind tugged at her jacket as she crossed the sidewalk. The man looked up when she approached. His eyes were tired, red around the edges. The face of someone carrying more weight than he could hold alone. "Sir," Emily said gently, "I brought you some coffee." For a second, he simply stared at her, confused, as though kindness was the last thing he expected. Then his gaze shifted toward the cup. "Why?" The question surprised her. "Because it is cold out here." A faint smile appeared before quickly disappearing. Up close, she could smell alcohol on his breath. Not overwhelming, just enough to tell its own story. Emily handed him the coffee. Then she glanced toward the SUV. "Your daughter." The man's expression softened immediately. He turned toward the vehicle. "Lily." The single word carried more love than anything else he had said. Emily looked at the sleeping child through the rain-covered window, then back at the father sitting alone beneath the storm. She did not know his name. She did not know his story. She only knew that some people needed help long before they asked for it. And on that rainy night, she decided not to walk away. The man wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup as if he had forgotten what warmth felt like. Rain continued falling around them, drumming against the pavement and bouncing off the black SUV, parked a few yards away. Emily stood beneath the umbrella and waited. She had learned long ago that people often spoke when they stopped feeling judged. For several moments, neither of them said anything. The storm filled the silence. Finally, the man took a careful sip of coffee and released a slow breath. "Thank you," he said quietly. His voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had not slept well in a very long time. Emily smiled. "You are welcome." His eyes drifted back toward the SUV. Through the fogged rear window, Lily remained asleep, curled beneath a pink blanket. The sight seemed to ground him. "She should be home," he murmured. "Instead, she is sitting in a parking lot because her father cannot get himself together." Emily followed his gaze. She could hear the sadness hidden beneath the words. "She is asleep," Emily said gently. "That means she feels safe." The man looked surprised by the answer. Then he laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because nobody had said something kind to him in a while. Another flash of lightning illuminated the parking lot. For a second, Emily noticed details she had missed before. His suit was expensive. The watch on his wrist looked far beyond anything she could afford. Even soaked by rain, everything about him suggested success. Yet his face told a different story. A story of loss. A story of loneliness. The kind money could not fix. You should probably get home, Emily said. This weather is only getting worse. The man nodded, but made no effort to stand. I know. She hesitated. Do you have someone who can drive you? He stared into the coffee. Not tonight. Emily thought for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone. I can call a car service. He immediately shook his head. No. His voice was firm, but not rude. I can manage. Emily looked toward the SUV again. The little girl had not moved. The situation worried her. Can you? The question hung in the air. The man lowered his eyes. For the first time, he seemed completely honest. Probably not. Emily nodded slowly. Then let me help. 10 minutes later, a professional car service was on its way. The driver had already confirmed the pickup location. Emily stood beside the SUV while the man sat quietly on the bench finishing the last of his coffee. When the vehicle finally arrived, she helped make sure Lily remained asleep as the driver carefully transferred her into the back seat. The father watched everything with grateful eyes. Before getting into the car himself, he turned toward Emily. Most people would have walked past. Emily shrugged. Most people are tired at the end of a long shift. And you are not. A small smile appeared on her face. I am. I just do not think being tired is a good reason to stop caring. For a moment, he seemed unable to answer. Then he reached into his coat pocket and removed something. A business card, perhaps. But another gust of wind tore through the parking lot. The item slipped from his hand and disappeared beneath the storm. Neither of them noticed where it landed. The driver opened the rear door. Lily stirred slightly, but remained asleep. The man looked back one last time. I hope life is kind to you, Emily. She blinked in surprise. She had never told him her name. Then she remembered the embroidered name tag on her uniform. Before she could respond, the car door closed. Moments later, the vehicle disappeared into the rain. Emily stood alone beneath the umbrella watching the taillights fade into the darkness, completely unaware that something valuable had been left behind on the bench where the stranger had been sitting. The storm finally began to weaken sometime after midnight. By then, the restaurant was closed, the chairs were stacked, and most of the staff had gone home. Emily Parker was the last employee leaving through the front entrance. She stepped outside carrying her worn handbag and paused for a moment beneath the awning. The parking lot glistened beneath the streetlights. Pools of water reflected fragments of yellow light across the pavement. That was when she noticed something resting on the bench. At first, she assumed it was trash left behind by a customer. Then she walked closer. Her eyes widened. A watch. Not an ordinary watch. Even Emily, who knew very little about luxury items, could tell it was expensive. The metal gleamed beneath the fading rain. The craftsmanship looked flawless. Carefully, she picked it up. It felt surprisingly heavy in her hand. Instantly, she knew who it belonged to. The man from earlier. The father sitting alone in the storm. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Then a thought entered her mind. Rent was due in 4 days. The thought disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Emily sighed softly. Life had never been easy financially. Her apartment was small. Her savings account was smaller. Unexpected expenses seemed to appear every month. Yet none of those facts changed a simple truth. The watch was not hers. She slipped it carefully into her bag and headed toward her car. The next morning, sunlight finally returned. Emily sat at her tiny kitchen table drinking instant coffee while examining the watch again. Up close, it looked even more valuable. There was an engraving on the back. 2 words. To Dad. Beneath them was a date from several years earlier. Emily traced the letters gently with her thumb. Something about the inscription made the watch feel less like an expensive object and more like a memory. Whoever had given it to him clearly loved him. The realization strengthened her decision. She had to find him. Unfortunately, she had almost nothing to work with. No phone number. No name. No business card. Just a memory of a tired man, a sleeping little girl named Lily, and a watch. Later that afternoon, Emily brought the watch to work. During a slow period between customers, she showed it to Megan. The manager nearly dropped it. Emily, do you know what this could be worth? Emily shook her head. Megan laughed nervously. More than my car. Several nearby employees gathered around. One of them immediately suggested taking it to a jeweler. Another recommended contacting a pawn shop just to learn its value. Emily listened quietly. Then she placed the watch back into its protective cloth. I am returning it. Nobody seemed surprised. That was exactly what Emily would do. Still, finding the owner seemed almost impossible. 3 days passed. Then 4. Every evening, Emily checked the restaurant parking lot. Every evening, it remained empty. No black SUV. No mysterious father. No Lily. By Friday, she began wondering if she would ever see them again. Then something unexpected happened. Near closing time, a customer sitting alone at the counter noticed the watch as Emily adjusted her bag. The man's eyes widened immediately. That cannot be real. Emily looked confused. What? He pointed toward the watch. That model is nearly impossible to find. Emily froze. The customer leaned closer. Whoever owns that is either incredibly wealthy or incredibly lucky. Emily glanced down at the watch resting beside her order pad. For the first time, she realized she might be searching for someone far more important than she originally imagined. Yet strangely, that thought changed nothing. Whether he was rich or poor, famous or unknown, the watch still belonged to him. And somehow, Emily became more determined than ever to return it. Across the city, the man Emily had helped was living through a week he wished he could erase. Ethan Brooks stood alone in a glass-walled office overlooking downtown Seattle. Morning sunlight poured through the windows, but it did little to brighten the mood inside. His desk was covered with reports, contracts, and messages demanding immediate attention. Yet his eyes kept drifting toward a framed photograph beside his computer. In the picture, a younger Ethan stood beside his wife Ava while a 6-year-old Lily sat on his shoulders, laughing at something beyond the camera. The photo had been taken 4 years earlier, before everything changed, before Ava's illness, before the silence that followed. Ethan lowered himself into his chair and rubbed his eyes. He had built one of the most successful technology companies in the country. Business magazines called him visionary. Investors called him brilliant. Employees called him demanding but fair. None of those titles mattered much when he returned home each night to an empty side of the bed. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant stepped into the office. Your 9 o'clock meeting starts in 10 minutes. Ethan nodded. Thank you. She hesitated before leaving. You seem better today. Ethan almost smiled. Better was a relative term. Still, she was not entirely wrong. Something had changed since that rainy night. He could not stop thinking about the waitress. Not because she had done anything extraordinary. Quite the opposite. She had done something increasingly rare. She had been kind without expecting anything in return. The memory followed him through every meeting that week. The umbrella, the coffee, the concern for Lily, the absence of judgment in her eyes. Most people treated him differently once they recognized him. Some wanted favors. Others wanted access. Some wanted money. Emily had wanted none of those things because she had no idea who he was. That realization stayed with him. Ethan opened a desk drawer and reached automatically for his watch. His hand stopped halfway. The drawer was empty. His expression tightened. For several seconds, he simply stared into the space where it should have been. That watch had never been about money. Lily had saved her allowance for months to help purchase the engraving when she was younger. The gift had become one of his most treasured possessions. Losing it felt strangely personal. More personal than losing a business contract worth millions. His phone rang. It was Charles Whitmore, the company's longtime attorney. Ethan answered. Good morning. Charles got straight to the point. I finally tracked down the timeline from last Friday. Ethan sat forward. And your driver confirmed everything. The restaurant staff helped arrange transportation. Ethan nodded slowly. What about the waitress? There was a brief pause. Still working there. No complaints. No disciplinary issues. Excellent reputation. Ethan looked toward the city skyline. A small smile appeared. That sounds about right. Charles sounded curious. Do you want me to contact her? Ethan considered the question. The easy answer would have been yes. But something stopped him. He remembered the sincerity in Emily's voice when she spoke about caring for people. He remembered how naturally she had helped a stranger. Some things deserved more than a phone call. No, Ethan said quietly. Not yet. After ending the call, he walked toward the window. Far below, thousands of people hurried through their ordinary lives. Most would never meet him. Most would never know his name. Yet somehow one waitress had managed to leave a deeper impression than many executives he had worked beside for years. Ethan stared at his reflection in the glass and made a decision. The following week, he would visit the restaurant himself. Not as a billionaire. Not as a CEO. Just as a father who owed someone a proper thank you. Saturday arrived wrapped in clear skies and cool autumn air. For most people, it felt like the perfect weekend. For Ethan Brooks, it felt like the first quiet morning he had experienced in months. He sat at the kitchen table while Lily colored. Pictures beside him. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor. A half-finished cup of coffee rested near his hand. The house was peaceful, yet his thoughts kept drifting backward. "Dad," Lily looked up from her drawing. "You are doing it again." Ethan smiled faintly. "Doing what?" "Thinking too much." He laughed softly. "You sound like your mother." Lily grinned before returning to her crayons. The mention of Ava brought both warmth and sadness. Some days the memories felt comforting. Other days they felt impossibly heavy. Ethan had spent years pretending he could carry everything alone. The company, the responsibilities, the expectations, the grief. That rainy night had been the first time he admitted to himself that he was tired. Truly tired. And somehow a waitress he had never met before had recognized it immediately. Across town, Emily Parker was experiencing a very different Saturday. She stood behind the restaurant counter reviewing her monthly expenses during a break. Rent, utilities, car insurance, groceries. The numbers never seemed to leave much room for surprises. Yet the watch remained safely wrapped inside a small cloth pouch in her locker. Every day she considered turning it over to the police. Every day she hesitated. Something told her the owner would eventually come looking for it. That afternoon, a young mother entered the restaurant with a little boy who looked nervous. Emily noticed immediately. The child studied the menu with worried eyes. After a few minutes, she knelt beside the table and patiently helped him choose a meal. The boy's face brightened. His mother looked relieved. It was a small moment, one of dozens that happened every week. Emily never thought much about them. Kindness had become a habit. Meanwhile, several miles away, Ethan sat in a conference room finishing a brief meeting with Charles Whitmore. The attorney placed a folder on the table. "Everything we found about the restaurant is here." Ethan glanced at it. "You investigated the business?" Charles nodded. "You asked me to learn more." Ethan smiled. "I asked about one waitress." Charles returned the smile, which turned out to be easier than expected. "Everyone seems to like her." Ethan opened the folder. Employee reviews, performance notes, customer comments. One sentence appeared repeatedly. "She treats everyone with respect." Ethan stared at the words longer than necessary. Respect. Such a simple thing, yet increasingly rare. Charles leaned back. "You know, most people would have sold that watch by now." Ethan looked toward the window. The thought had crossed his mind several times. A watch worth that much money could solve a lot of problems. Yet somehow he had never believed Emily would do it. "No," Ethan said quietly. "She would not." Charles studied him carefully. "You seem very certain." Ethan remembered the umbrella, the coffee, the concern for Lily, the complete absence of self-interest. Then he smiled. "Some people tell you who they are in 5 minutes." Outside, the afternoon sun slowly descended toward the horizon. Neither Ethan nor Emily realized that exactly 1 week had passed since the storm. Neither knew their paths were about to cross again. But somewhere between gratitude and destiny, events had already begun moving toward a moment that would change both of their lives. Monday evening arrived with the quiet energy of a normal workday. Customers filled the restaurant. Plates moved between tables. Conversations blended into a steady background hum. To Emily Parker, it felt like every other shift she had worked during the past 3 years. She greeted guests, refilled coffee cups, smiled at families, listened patiently to elderly customers who enjoyed telling stories longer than they stayed for dinner. The watch remained safely locked in her employee locker. She planned to bring it home again after work. Across the city, however, a different plan was unfolding. Ethan Brooks sat in the back seat of a black sedan as it moved through downtown traffic. He wore a simple navy jacket instead of the tailored suits that usually accompanied him to public appearances. Beside him sat Lily, who looked up from her book. "Are we really going back?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "We are." Lily closed her book. "To see the waitress?" "To thank her." Lily thought for a moment. "Mom used to say people remember kindness longer than gifts." Ethan's smile softened. "Ava used to say that often." "Your mother was right." As the sedan approached the restaurant, Ethan felt something unexpected. Nervousness. It made little sense. He negotiated billion-dollar contracts without hesitation. He spoke before thousands of investors every year. Yet somehow walking into a restaurant felt more intimidating. Perhaps because gratitude required honesty, and honesty was harder than business. Meanwhile, Emily was helping an elderly couple choose dessert when Megan suddenly appeared beside her. Table 12 just arrived. Emily glanced toward the dining room. Nothing seemed unusual. A man and a young girl sat near the window. The little girl was reading a book. The man appeared relaxed. Familiar somehow. Emily studied him for another second. Then her eyes widened slightly. The rain. The bench. The coffee. Oh. Megan followed her gaze. You know them? Emily shook her head. I think so. Trying to remain professional, she picked up 2 menus and walked toward the table. As she approached, Lily looked up first. Recognition instantly brightened the girl's face. Dad, it is her. Ethan stood politely. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. Then Emily smiled. You made it home safely. Ethan laughed softly. Of all the possible things she could have said, that was the one she chose. Yes, he replied. Thanks to you. Emily handed them menus. I am glad. Lily leaned forward. Dad talked about you all week. Ethan looked mildly embarrassed. Lily seemed proud of the fact. Emily smiled again. There was something refreshing about the child's honesty. Before leaving to give them time with the menus, she paused. Actually, I have something that belongs to you. Ethan looked confused. Emily disappeared briefly and returned carrying a small cloth pouch. She placed it gently on the table. Ethan opened it. The moment he saw the watch, his expression changed completely. Surprise gave way to relief. Then gratitude. Real gratitude. The kind that cannot be rehearsed. For several seconds, he simply stared at the engraving on the back. To Dad. Lily immediately recognized it. You found it. Emily nodded. It was on the bench after you left. Ethan looked up slowly. You kept it safe all this time? Emily shrugged. I was waiting for the owner to come back. Around them, the restaurant continued its ordinary evening. Customers laughed. Dishes clinked softly. Nobody realized that at table 12, a simple act of honesty had just confirmed everything Ethan already suspected about the woman standing before him. For the rest of the evening, Ethan and Lily remained at table 12 while the restaurant moved through its usual rhythm. Yet something had changed. Not in the room. In Ethan. Every few minutes his eyes drifted toward the waitress moving between tables with effortless patience. She laughed with customers. Helped an elderly man read the menu when he forgot his glasses. Carried extra napkins to a young family before they even asked. None of it seemed calculated. None of it appeared designed to impress anyone. She simply paid attention. Lily noticed it too. She is nice to everybody, she whispered. Ethan nodded. She is. A few minutes later, a customer accidentally dropped a wallet near the entrance without realizing it. Emily spotted it immediately. Rather than placing it behind the counter, she hurried outside and returned it before the customer even reached the parking lot. The man looked relieved. Emily smiled and returned to work as though nothing important had happened. Ethan exchanged a glance with Lily. Neither said a word. They were thinking the same thing. By the time dinner ended, Ethan felt more certain than ever. The person he met during the storm had not been an exception. That was simply who Emily was every day. When the check arrived, Ethan quietly folded it closed. Emily appeared beside the table. Would you like anything else? Ethan looked up. Actually, yes. Emily waited. Would you sit with us for a minute when your shift ends? The request surprised her. Not because it felt inappropriate. Because customers rarely asked questions that required more than a few seconds to answer. I suppose I could spare a minute. Ethan smiled. Good. An hour later, the restaurant had grown quieter. Lily sat finishing a slice of pie while Ethan waited near the window. Emily finally removed her apron and approached the table. She looked tired but content. The kind of tired that comes from honest work. Ethan stood. Thank you for staying. Emily sat across from them. You wanted to talk? Ethan glanced at Lily before speaking. First, I wanted to thank you properly. Emily smiled. You already did. No. Ethan replied gently. I really did not. For a moment, he seemed unsure where to begin. Then he looked out the window toward the dark parking lot. Last Friday was the anniversary of my wife's passing. Emily's expression softened immediately. Ethan continued. Every year I tell myself it gets easier. Every year I discover grief follows its own schedule. Lily quietly reached for her father's hand. He squeezed hers gently. That night, Ethan said, I made some poor decisions. Not dangerous ones. Just lonely ones. Emily listened without interrupting. Then a stranger walked into the rain and treated me like a human being. Silence settled over the table. Warm, comfortable, honest. Finally, Emily spoke. Everyone needs help sometimes. Ethan laughed softly. That is exactly what my wife used to say. Lily smiled at that. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. Nothing dramatic. Nothing extraordinary. Yet by the end, something unexpected had formed. Not friendship exactly. Not yet. Just mutual respect. The kind built when two people see each other clearly. As Emily prepared to leave, Ethan stood once more. There is something else you should know. Emily paused. Ethan exchanged a glance with Lily. Then he took a slow breath. The moment had arrived. The moment when he would finally tell her who he really was. Emily paused beside the table. The restaurant around them had grown almost silent. Only a few employees remained cleaning for the night. Outside, city lights reflected across the dark glass windows. Ethan looked at her calmly. You have probably heard of Brooks Technologies. Emily nodded. Almost everyone had. The company appeared regularly in business magazines and local news reports. Of course. Ethan smiled faintly. I own it. For a second, Emily thought he was joking. Then she noticed the complete seriousness in his expression. Her eyes moved from Ethan to Lily and back again. Suddenly dozens of small details made sense. The expensive watch. The tailored clothes. The driver. The quiet confidence. You are Ethan Brooks? She asked. Ethan nodded. Emily sat back in her chair, genuinely surprised. During the entire week, she had imagined many possibilities. Billionaire had not been one of them. Lily seemed amused by her reaction. That is usually the face people make. Emily laughed despite herself. I am sorry. I just did not expect that. That is exactly why I never mentioned it. Ethan replied. The night we met, you saw a tired father. Nothing else. Emily thought about the storm, the bench, the coffee. That was all I needed to see. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment. The answer appeared to affect him more than she realized. Many people spent their lives being measured by titles, wealth, or accomplishments. Very few were simply treated like human beings. After a brief silence, Ethan reached into his jacket and removed a folded piece of paper. I have been thinking about something all week. Emily accepted the paper and unfolded it. It contained information about a scholarship and professional development program funded through Ethan's foundation. She looked confused. What is this? An opportunity, Ethan said. Nothing is guaranteed. No special treatment. No gifts. No free money. Just an opportunity. Emily continued reading. The program helped working adults pursue education, business training, and career advancement without accumulating overwhelming debt. Why are you showing me this? Ethan smiled. Because I asked around. Emily immediately looked skeptical. Ethan laughed softly. Nothing invasive. I learned that you work hard, help everyone around you, and put your own goals on hold to pay bills. Emily looked down at the paper again. She had dreamed about returning to school for years. Life simply kept getting in the way. I cannot accept charity, she said quietly. Good, Ethan replied. Neither can I. The answer surprised her. Ethan leaned forward slightly. I am not offering charity. I am offering access. The rest would depend entirely on you. Lily nodded. Enthusiastically. Dad says opportunities matter more than gifts because opportunities keep working after the gift is gone. Ethan smiled. I may have said something like that. Emily looked from father to daughter. There was something remarkably genuine about them. Despite everything Ethan had achieved, he seemed less interested in impressing people than in helping them succeed. Finally, Emily folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her purse. I will think about it. Ethan's smile widened. That is all I hoped for. As they stood to leave, none of them noticed Megan watching quietly from across the room. She had witnessed enough of the conversation to know something important had happened. Not because of money, not because of status, because for the second time in 1 week, a simple act of kindness had opened a door that neither Emily nor Ethan could have imagined when rain first began falling outside the restaurant. The paper remained folded inside Emily's purse for 3 days before she opened it again. Not because she lacked interest, because she was afraid to hope. Hope could be expensive when life operated on a tight budget. Tuesday evening found her sitting alone at her kitchen table after another long shift. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. A notebook filled with handwritten expenses sat beside her. Rent, utilities, car payment, groceries. The familiar list stared back at her. Slowly, She unfolded the information Ethan had given her. For nearly an hour, she read every page. The program offered training in business management, leadership, and hospitality operations. Participants could continue working while attending courses. Graduates often moved into management positions or launched businesses of their own. Emily leaned back in her chair. Years earlier, she had dreamed about opening a small café. Nothing extravagant, just a warm place where people felt welcome, somewhere coffee and kindness mattered equally. Then real life arrived with bills, responsibilities, and practical decisions. Dreams became something she occasionally remembered instead of something she actively pursued. Her phone buzzed. It was Megan. "You still awake?" Emily laughed softly and answered, "Barely." Megan immediately asked the question she had been waiting to ask. "Have you decided?" Emily looked down at the application papers. "Not yet." "Why?" Emily hesitated. "Because opportunities like this do not happen to people like me." Megan became quiet. Then she replied with unusual firmness. "Emily, opportunities like this happen exactly because of people like you." The words lingered long after the call ended. The next morning brought an unexpected surprise. Ethan arrived at the restaurant again, this time alone. He chose a small booth near the back and ordered coffee. Nothing more. Emily noticed immediately. "You know this place has more than coffee." Ethan smiled. "The coffee is good." She laughed. "That sounds suspicious." Over the next hour, he simply sat and worked on documents while customers came and went. Several recognized him. Most were too polite to interrupt. What fascinated Emily was how differently he behaved from the wealthy executives she occasionally served. He thanked employees by name, returned his dishes neatly stacked, smiled at everyone who approached the table. At one point, an elderly customer accidentally dropped a cane near his booth. Ethan stood instantly and helped retrieve it. No cameras, no audience, no publicity, just kindness. Emily found herself remembering something Lily had said. People remember kindness longer than gifts. Perhaps that explained why Ethan seemed different. By the end of the visit, he approached the counter carrying his coffee cup. "Have you made a decision?" Emily knew exactly what he meant. "Not yet." Ethan nodded. "Fair enough." Then he reached into his pocket and placed a small folded note on the counter. "Read this later." Before she could ask questions, he headed toward the exit. Outside, sunlight illuminated the sidewalk where rain had fallen only a week earlier. After he left, Emily unfolded the note. The handwriting was simple. It contained only one sentence. "The world already has enough people who doubt you. Do not volunteer for the job yourself." Emily stared at the words for a long time. Something shifted inside her. Not dramatically. Not all. At once. Just enough to make possibility feel slightly more real than fear. And for the first time in years, she began filling out the application. 2 weeks later, Emily almost convinced herself that nothing would come from the application. Life had a way of returning to normal, no matter how extraordinary a moment seemed at the time. She continued working double shifts, continued balancing bills, continued serving coffee and memorizing regular customers' orders. Yet every evening after work, she spent an hour studying course materials from the program website. Small steps, quiet steps, the kind nobody noticed. Then Thursday morning arrived. Emily was preparing silverware before the lunch rush when her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and nearly dropped it. The message came from the foundation office. Her application had advanced to the final interview stage. For several seconds, she simply stared at the words. Megan noticed immediately. "What happened?" Emily handed her the phone. Megan read the message and let out a cheer loud enough to turn heads across the restaurant. Customers looked over. Employees stopped working. Emily laughed in embarrassment while Megan celebrated enough for both of them. Across town, Ethan was finishing a board meeting when a notification appeared on his tablet. He opened it quietly beneath the conference table. Applicant update, Emily Parker. Finalist status approved. A small smile appeared. He closed the notification immediately. He had never interfered with the selection process. In fact, he specifically instructed the foundation to evaluate her exactly as they would anyone else. That mattered to him. Opportunities should open doors. They should not carry people through them. Later that afternoon, Ethan picked up Lily from school. She climbed into the passenger seat carrying a stack of drawings. "Did she get in?" she asked before he even started the engine. Ethan laughed. "You ask that every day." "Because I want to know." Ethan nodded. She made the final round. Lily raised both arms in celebration. I knew it. Ethan looked at his daughter and shook his head. You have a lot of confidence in people. Lily smiled. Maybe because Mom did. The words settled warmly between them. That evening, Emily arrived for her interview. The foundation headquarters occupied several floors inside a modern downtown building. Everything looked intimidating. Glass walls, marble floors, executives moving confidently through hallways. For a brief moment, self-doubt returned. Then she remembered the note Ethan had given her. The world already has enough people who doubt you. Do not volunteer for the job yourself. She took a breath and walked forward. The interview lasted nearly 90 minutes. Questions about leadership, problem solving, customer service, long-term goals. Emily answered honestly. She spoke about hospitality, about creating spaces where people felt seen, about the difference one thoughtful interaction could make during a difficult day. When the interview ended, one committee member smiled. You talk about people differently than most applicants. Emily looked surprised. How do most applicants talk? The woman laughed softly. Mostly about careers. Emily considered the answer. Careers matter. But people are the reason careers exist. Several committee members exchanged impressed glances. Hours later, as she walked home beneath a sky filled with evening stars, Emily felt something she had not experienced in years. Pride. Not because success was guaranteed. Not because a billionaire had noticed her. But because she had finally given herself permission to try. And sometimes, that is where every real transformation begins. 3 days later, Emily received the call while carrying a tray of coffee refills across the dining room. Her phone vibrated inside her apron pocket. Normally, she ignored personal calls during work, but something about the number caught her attention. It matched the foundation office. Her heart immediately began racing. She quickly handed the tray to another server and stepped into the hallway near the employee entrance. Taking a deep breath, she answered, "Hello." A warm voice greeted her. "Emily Parker?" "Yes. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for this year's Leadership and Business Development Program." For a second, the world seemed to stop moving. Emily leaned against the wall. She heard the words. She understood the words. Yet somehow they felt unreal. The woman continued explaining schedules, orientation dates, and program details. Emily listened carefully, but emotion blurred parts of the conversation. When the call finally ended, she simply stood there staring at the dark screen in her hand. After years of postponing dreams, something had finally moved forward. Something had finally opened. Moments later, Megan found her. What happened? Emily looked up. A smile slowly appeared. Then another. Before long, she was laughing and crying at the same time. Megan immediately understood. She wrapped Emily in a hug. "You got in." Emily nodded. "I got in." The news spread through the restaurant faster than any special promotion ever had. Employees congratulated her. Customers who knew her personally celebrated alongside the staff. One elderly regular insisted on buying dessert for the entire break room. By the end of the evening, Emily felt overwhelmed in the best possible way. Across the city, Ethan was helping Lily with homework when his phone buzzed. The notification came directly from the foundation director. Final selection completed. Emily Parker accepted. Ethan leaned back in his chair and smiled. Lily noticed instantly. Good news. Ethan handed her the phone. She read the message and immediately grinned. "I knew she would make it." Ethan laughed. "You seem determined to be right about everything." Lily shrugged. "Not everything. Just people." Her answer reminded him so much of Ava that he found himself staring out the window for a moment. There was sadness in the memory. But for the first time in years, the sadness no longer felt lonely. The following week, orientation day arrived. Emily entered the foundation conference center feeling nervous and excited at the same time. Participants from across the country filled the room. Entrepreneurs, small business owners, restaurant managers, community leaders. Everyone carried impressive resumes and ambitious goals. Emily wondered briefly whether she belonged there. Then she remembered why she had been selected. Not because of who she knew, because of who she was. During the opening presentation, a familiar figure stepped onto the stage. Ethan. The room immediately grew quiet. He welcomed everyone before speaking about leadership. Surprisingly, he spent very little time discussing business. Instead, he spoke about trust, character, integrity, the small decisions that shape larger outcomes. Near the end of his remarks, His eyes briefly met Emily's across the room. He did not call attention to her. He did not mention the restaurant. He simply smiled. A quiet acknowledgement. Nothing more. Emily smiled back. In that moment, she understood something important. The greatest gift Ethan had given her was never the opportunity itself. It was the reminder that kindness, honesty, and perseverance still mattered in a world obsessed with status. And as she sat among future leaders from every corner of the country, Emily realized her life had already begun changing long before she received the acceptance call. It began the night she chose to walk into the rain. Months passed. Winter slowly gave way to spring, and spring eventually surrendered to the first warm days of summer. Emily's life became busier than she ever imagined possible. She still worked at the restaurant several days each week, but now her schedule also included classes, leadership workshops, mentoring sessions, and projects that pushed her far beyond her comfort zone. The adjustment was not easy. Many nights, she arrived home exhausted. Some evenings, she fell asleep with textbooks open beside her. More than once she questioned whether she was capable of keeping up with participants who seemed far more experienced than she was. Yet every time doubt appeared, she remembered the rainy night that started everything. One decision, one act of kindness, one step forward, and then another. One afternoon, nearly 8 months after entering the program, Emily stood before a panel of business leaders to present her final project. The assignment required participants to design a realistic business plan that could positively impact their communities. While others focused on technology, investment models, or large-scale expansion strategies, Emily chose something deeply personal. She presented a proposal for a neighborhood café designed around connection rather than speed. A place where elderly residents could gather without feeling rushed. A place where students could study. A place where single parents could bring children without feeling unwelcome. A place where every customer would be treated like a person instead of a transaction. As she spoke, the room grew increasingly quiet. Not because the idea was revolutionary, because it felt genuine. Every detail reflected lived experience. Every solution came from years spent observing people. When the presentation ended, the audience remained silent for a moment before applause filled the room. Emily looked down, overwhelmed. Across the room, Ethan watched with unmistakable pride. He had attended many presentations over the years. Most were impressive. Few were memorable. This one was both. Later that evening, participants gathered for a closing reception overlooking the city skyline. Soft music played in the background. Glass walls reflected the lights of downtown Seattle. Emily stood near the balcony speaking with several classmates when she noticed Ethan and Lily approaching. Lily was taller now, more confident, yet her smile remained exactly the same. "You were amazing," Lily announced before anyone else could speak. Emily laughed. "Thank you." Ethan handed her a small envelope. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a formal letter. Emily scanned the first few lines and immediately looked up in disbelief. A group of community investors had agreed to support the development of her cafe concept, not as a gift, not as charity, as a business partnership based entirely on the strength of her proposal. Emily looked speechless. Ethan smiled. "You earned that." For a moment, she could not find words. The opportunity she once considered impossible was now standing directly in front of her. Not because someone rescued her, because someone believed she was capable of rescuing her own future. As city lights shimmered beyond the windows, Emily realized the dream she had hidden away for years was no longer a dream. It was becoming a plan, and for the first time, that future felt close enough to touch. 1 year later, the bell above the cafe door chimed softly as a new customer stepped inside. Morning sunlight streamed through wide front windows. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air. Conversations flowed easily between neighbors gathered around wooden tables. Laughter occasionally rose from a corner where a group of retirees met every Tuesday. Near the entrance, a small bookshelf invited visitors to borrow a novel and return it whenever they wished. Everything felt warm, intentional, human, exactly as Emily Parker had imagined. She stood behind the counter reviewing inventory reports when a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "I think this place might be becoming popular." Emily looked up and smiled immediately. Ethan Brooks stood near the doorway with Lily beside him. Lily was carrying 2 books and wearing the same bright smile she had carried since the day they met. "You think?" Emily laughed. I only had to turn away 3 customers this morning because every table was full. Ethan glanced around the cafe. His eyes settled on the details. The photographs from local community events. The handwritten notes customers had pinned to a gratitude board near the entrance. The quiet sense of belonging that filled the room. You built exactly what you described that night at the presentation. Emily looked around carefully. Sometimes she still could not believe it was real. The cafe had opened 4 months earlier. Business was strong. More importantly, people genuinely loved being there. Students studied after school. Families gathered on weekends. Elderly residents found companionship. Strangers became regulars. The dream had become part of the community. Lily walked toward the gratitude board and began reading notes aloud. One thanked the staff for helping a lonely customer feel welcome after moving to the city. Another thanked the cafe for hosting free community gatherings. Another simply said, "This place feels like home." Emily felt her eyes soften. Those messages meant more than revenue reports ever could. Ethan noticed. Still measuring success the same way? Emily nodded. People first. Ethan smiled. Good answer. They settled into a booth near the window. The same kind of window where rain once blurred the world outside another restaurant. For a while they simply talked. About work. About school. About life. The friendship that had formed over the past year felt easy now. Natural. Built on respect instead of obligation. At one point Lily looked toward Emily. Do you ever think about that storm? Emily laughed softly. More often than you would expect. Ethan glanced toward the window where sunlight now replaced rain. Funny how one evening can change everything. Emily thought carefully before answering. I do not think it was the evening. Ethan looked curious. No. Emily shook her head. I think it was the choice. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. The kind that appears when everyone knows a truth has just been spoken. Because she was right. The storm had not changed their lives. A billionaire had not changed their lives. A scholarship had not changed their lives. Everything began with a simple choice. A tired waitress choosing kindness. A grieving father choosing gratitude. A young girl choosing optimism. Small decisions. Ordinary moments. Extraordinary consequences. Outside, people continued walking beneath the bright afternoon sky. Inside, the cafe buzzed with warmth and conversation. Emily stood to help a customer near the counter. Ethan watched her for a moment before looking toward Lily. His daughter smiled knowingly. Neither needed to say anything. Some stories do not begin with power, money, or status. They begin with a cup of coffee offered to a stranger in the rain. And sometimes the quietest acts of kindness travel farther than anyone could ever imagine.